Here we go. Welcome to the Transform with Travel podcast, where we share stories of personal transformation and life lessons through our experiences of traveling and exploring the world. Travel is the ultimate accelerator for personal growth, and it can be the root catalyst for the pivots and plot twists we make in our lives. I'm your host, Kelly Tolliday, and it's my mission to inspire you to live life to its fullest, travel with an open mind and heart, and let the world show you a new perspective. I'm so grateful you're here with us today, so let's dive right in. Happy exploring. Welcome to the Transform with Travel podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Tolliday, and I am sitting here with Courtney Page. I'm so excited to welcome you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we met on Instagram a little while ago because we actually record at the same studio here at Child & Company. And we reached out and we're like, hey, we have a lot of interests in common here. We're yoga teachers, we're podcast hosts, we're moms. Let's meet up. And it was so nice to meet you in person. And we decided, let's do this. Let's go on each other's podcasts.
I know. It kind of made sense. And yeah, it was really weird, all of the commonalities that we have. So yeah, thanks for having me. I have not traveled in a while to anywhere that exciting, but I love travel and I love what you're doing with it. So
And what's really cool is we're going to talk about travel in a different way today, about how people want to view their career breaks that they might take. A lot of people feel really uninspired or really stuck in a job and they don't know what pivots to take. And sometimes we talk about travel as big international trips or a big road trip, but sometimes traveling is traveling from one level of yourself to another level of yourself, or traveling within your own mind to a different level that you get to unlock. And part of this is how you express yourself through your career. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. But for those listening who don't know Courtney Page, she is a seasoned executive recruiter turned career and executive coach with a solid background in executive recruiting and a lifelong interest in yoga philosophy. Courtney extends her experience and expertise past the job search to encompass all of the nuances that feed into major career decisions. As the host of Resume, Courtney utilizes her exceptional interviewing skills and leads with curiosity as she discusses the unique and surprising career paths of professionals from a variety of industries, investigating how they have and continue to cultivate happiness in their careers. So I'm really excited because as someone who's worked in corporate marketing agency job for 10, 11, 12 years and now working in my own business, I hear a lot from people how they feel just so stuck and they don't know where the next move is, or they want to go travel and take a year, but they're not sure how that's going to look on their resume and all the things. And I know that you work with so many people in so many different levels and capacities. So I'm excited to hear from you. I'd love for you to just how'd you get into recruiting, and then how'd you turn that into your own business of career coaching?
Yeah, so my dad was actually an executive recruiter. He spent his entire career in staffing, whether it was in a big company or on his own. And coming out of college, so I did international relations in college, so political science and English with international relations. And I graduated in 2009, so it was like the worst, right? The worst time to graduate. Anyway, like long story short, I ended up working for him and had worked for him while I was in college, like on breaks and stuff. And it had just always been in the background. You know, he worked from home before that was kind of like a thing. I kind of just fell into it, partly because he was like, I need some help. Will you help me? I was like, no. And and I did. And then I ended up really enjoying the freedom that working from home when it was not a thing allowed. And also I really liked kind of flipping it, where I think as we're going through school, you know, we're always the one being interviewed and having to like present ourselves, and having it flip and being able to interview someone was really interesting to me. Like I was like, oh, this is such a weird perspective that I haven't had yet. And I really enjoyed it because I was interviewing people who had way more experience than me, but they were kind of taking me seriously for like the first time, you know.
The dynamic was flipped a little bit.
It was flipped, yeah. And it was really interesting, and I really enjoyed it. And I just enjoyed hearing why people were where they were in their career and why they were open to talking to us, because we did a lot of passive recruiting. So it was more headhuntery as opposed to like a contingency search firm where you have a lot of people looking for jobs. This was more like we have a position, like a high-level position at a company. We have to go find the candidates and convince them, or not convince them, but, you know, show them why this would be like such a great, you know, move for them. And I always thought it was interesting just how people like were open to it, because changing your career or even just your position, your job within the same career is a big move. You know, it's very big. You know, it has a lot of effects on all the different aspects of your life. So every time someone would take a job, I was always like, wow, like why? You know, like I know why, but at the same time, like, wow, I guess we're good at this because, you know, it was just kind of interesting. So anyway, yeah. And I think another part of it was that I have always just been interested in that like big question of like, what am I supposed to do with my life? Like, what is the point? What is my purpose kind of? And recruiting allowed me to learn about all of these different types of careers that I would not have known existed. And it kind of filled that void of like, well, maybe I don't know what my purpose is, but at least I get to like, you know, learn about all these other purposes for other people.
Right. Help other people
And
find
help
theirs.
Yeah. So that's where recruiting came in. And then when I had my daughter at the beginning of the pandemic, I think you did too.
Yes. We have kids the exact same age.
Yeah. So that was so fun. So I kind of stopped working. I actually stopped working when I was pregnant with her, or maybe even a little bit, now I'm like forgetting, maybe it was even a little bit before, but I was kind of just burnt out. Like I was just like, I don't know if this is it. And I was lucky enough that I was able to take some time. I had her, and then in between having her and my son, I was like, well, maybe, you know, I really wanted to get back into work. And I think part of that was just from the pandemic and being like cooped up, you know, and it was like, really, we were like in the house with this new baby who's hilarious, but like it was just very like tunnel vision-y for a while.
Right.
So I started my own executive search firm, and then I got pregnant with my son and had kind of a difficult pregnancy. So that went on the back burner. When I came out of that, he's fine, he's great. I had always thought about coaching, and back in the day when I had first thought about it, everybody was like, nobody makes money doing that. That's not a real thing. And I think coaching has become a little bit more accepted, and more people are more open about talking about having coaches and the benefits of it. And I was just kind of like, well, fuck it. This is really what I want to do. And I started doing, you know, career and executive coaching back in the beginning, you know, earlier this year. And I started my podcast kind of as a little, I don't know, offshoot of that, just because I like podcasts and I really like interviewing people. So,
and the podcast, can you explain a little bit about what that is? Like, what are the stories that you're sharing? Who are you talking to?
Yeah. So the whole point of the podcast is basically through my recruiting and just in life, you know, through friends, a lot of people really hate their jobs. And it makes me very sad, which is why I you know, also went into career coaching, because I do think that there is something that you can do. There's so many things you can do, right? There are so many jobs that you either don't realize you have the skills for, or you just don't even know exist. And part of the podcast is just interviewing people who like their jobs and are happy in their jobs for whatever reason. And I think we were talking a little bit offline about this, but it's kind of like the 4-minute mile, where you're like, if you see it happen, it's more realistic and it is more doable. And that's kind of where the show is. So you can be happy. Here are some people who are. And also here are some careers that you might not know exist and actually work and that you can actually make money doing.
Totally. And I think we spoke a little bit about this offline as well, around it. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of a reframe. Somebody might hear someone on your podcast with a similar job or in a similar vertical and be like, wait, why is that person happy? And then they hear their story and they're like, wait, I have all those things too. Maybe I just needed a little bit of a perspective shift. Or sometimes somebody might hear a story of somebody who has very similar qualities or skill sets and be like, wait, I can do my own thing as well. So I think it's really cool giving people that option to recognize the value that's already in the job that they're in currently, or be able to see something beyond the scope of what they're doing and start something on the side or have some sort of passion project outside of that, which is really cool. And so you mentioned that in your bio, at least, that you're a lifelong learner of yoga and yoga philosophy, and you infuse that in how you help your clients. Do you think your studies with yoga helped you make that shift and jump into owning your own business? Like, where do you think your yoga practice helped you really step into that next level and take that leap of faith into running your own recruiting firm, running your own coaching business?
Yeah. Well, the recruiting firm was short-lived, I will say.
But you at least took the step to do it.
I did.
And not
I did
a lot of people do that.
Business development for it, and then it kind of halted because of the pregnancy. Not that I'm blaming him, but it was honestly, and that kind of ties into this. I could have come out of that pregnancy and after, the maternity leave that I gave myself and gone back to that because I had already started it and felt some kind of responsibility towards it. But I think, to your point about yoga and the philosophy and how it really helps when you're, just being off the mat and having that same perspective of like, is this going to really serve me? Am I going to be able to be there and like actually be there every day and want to be there doing this type of work? And I think it really just comes back to, and it sounds like so simple and cheesy, but like being. And like, I mean, we work most of the time. Most of our life is working, at least most of our conscious life is working. We might as well like it. And if we're not going to like it, you have to be able to acknowledge it first and then understand that there are different ways to either, like you said, reframe it or reroute and take a different path. So how did yoga affect what was the question? How did it affect your
choices to be able to take the leap of owning your own coaching business or even stepping outside of what you studied for college, even if you weren't studying yoga back then? It's like this sense of, at least for me, yoga brings a sense of awareness and clarity that even when I'm feeling really uncertain or even when I'm feeling really nervous about a risk, I know that the practices that I've done, the philosophy and the traditions are like holding me in that sense. So I guess my question was around like, how do you think taking those leaps of faith in your business and then also now helping others, how do you think yoga helps you, your study and lifelong learning of yoga, how do you think that helps you be a better coach?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, just the teachings of yoga. So incorporating all of the teachings that we learn in our yoga certification and being present, and so much of it comes back to, nervous system and breath and all of that, and being able to recognize when you're dysregulated or unregulated and knowing how to kind of snap yourself back into alignment with yourself. So if you're in a job and you hate it every day, you're not in alignment with your, it sounds cheesy, but like with your higher self, right? So what can you do? What practices have you done in the past where you feel really good? And you feel like something's clicking. And how can you either apply those to your current situation or take a step back? Maybe you need to remove yourself from that situation. But just like you said, bringing that awareness of like, I know when I feel good. Why do I feel good when I do? And why do I feel so bad in my job right now? Like there's something that's not balancing. So that's one main thing that a lot of people have where it's like, I just feel awful going into my job and this can't be the way that life is meant to be lived. And it's not. So, going through yoga, one, I found it at a time when I was traveling that was very transformative for me. And two, I always go back to this story and it's kind of weird, but back when I think I was like 11, I was in 6th grade. We all had to do this research project. And it was like the first research project we ever did. And we could pick anything. So I picked doing a research project on the Buddha. Like I have no idea why.
Wow.
I don't know why. And so I don't really know why. It's always been an interest of mine, even from this young age. So that's why I think the question is hard for me because I don't know. It was just always one of those things that like, that's just something I'm interested in. It's just something that speaks to me. And that is actually something that I like to have clients do where it's like, look back and find those things that you don't know why, but nobody else has kind of put them on you. So like if you play soccer, is that because you just randomly like decided you liked it? Or did your mom or dad do it and like, you play soccer because I played soccer and it's fun and, for all the best intentions. But what are like 2 or 3 things in your life that you are just intrinsically moved towards and pulled towards like a magnet? that you have no explanation for. We all have at least one, if not two or three. And I think yoga is just one of those things where it's like, I have no idea. I don't know why I wanted to do a random research project on the Buddha. And, fast forward, 10 years later, that's where I decided to study abroad. And
where? In India?
In India, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where in India were you?
So I was in Dharamsala, which is up in the Himalayas.
Wow.
So it was
Oh my
more
gosh.
for Tibetan and Himalayan studies.
Isn't that Dharamsala is where
The Dalai Lama?
Yes.
Yes.
Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's like a very remote, very high altitude, very not an easy place to get to. It's winding roads, mountains.
Have you been there?
I know I have not been all the way up there because we couldn't because there was a landslide with the roads, but I've been up in the Himalayas mountains, and anywhere is a challenge to get up there. How did you find that program? What made you say yes to that? That's incredible.
Yeah. So it was how did I find it? So my college, Muhlenberg College, which is this tiny little liberal arts.
I've never heard of it.
No one has ever heard of it. Everyone's like, did you really go to college? I'm like, yeah. It's this tiny little liberal arts school amongst a bunch of different tiny little liberal arts school outside of Philly. So my step-grandfather actually went there. That is the only reason I know about it. And I went for a tour, and it reminded me of Hogwarts. And it was just really pretty. And I was like, yeah, sure. So I went there. Most people studied abroad. So it was either the first semester of junior year or the second, and most people did first. At least in my recollection, if you're listening and you went to Muhlenberg and you did second, whatever. So it was kind of expected of people to study abroad. And they had, I don't know if it was new, but they kind of partnered with this institution called the School for International Training, where they did more immersive programs. Mm-hmm. So you could either do, I know they had all the business kids went to Maastricht in the Netherlands. A lot of the theater kids went to Goldsmiths in London, which is a great program. And the School for International Training had different programs all around the world. And I just thought that's so cool. And I think the first one that I was really interested in was, oh my gosh, I don't know if it was Egypt or South Africa. And my dad was like, no, you can't do that. I don't know why I was interested in it. I was just like, I don't know, it sounds cool. And then he was like, really, where would you really want to go? And I was like, India. And he was like, okay. I don't know why he said okay to that, but
yeah, where were the boundaries?
Where were the boundaries? I don't know.
He's like, no to South Africa, no to Egypt, but yes, in the remote Himalayan mountain range.
Yeah, I don't know. I think part of it was because of the Dalai Lama, because I do have a very vague memory of when I was I don't know, I must have been really young. And I think the Dalai Lama had come to Boston, which is, I'm from outside of Boston. And I remember my dad talking about this monk, and I don't even know if he went to see him. I don't know why that was a conversation. So anyway, maybe that's why. But yeah, so I ended up doing that. And it was basically, we did 2 weeks we did the orientation in Delhi. And then we went up to Dharamsala and we stayed with a Tibetan family. So we had a homestay there. And then we went to Kathmandu, and then we went to Lhasa. And then we did hiking in Tibet. And then we reversed it. So then we went back to Lhasa, back to Kathmandu, and then the end was a month-long research project that we did, and then we presented it and stuff.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was really cool, and I loved it. And it was I'm the person that talks about their study abroad from 15 years ago.
Yeah, right? You're that one time I was in India.
Was cool, and I went to India.
How long was the program?
It was a semester.
Wow.
So,
you said first semester.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
To spend that much time in India as well, it changes you as a person.
Yeah.
India it's incredible, and sometimes you'll feel like you're floating, and sometimes you feel like you're going to get chewed up and spit right back out. It is a very intense country in the most beautiful way. And so I can only imagine that experience really shaped you as a person.
Yeah. I mean, again, I still talk about it's so as far away, that was in 2007 and it's 2023. So it's been a while, but it's still so prominent in my memory. So yeah, I mean, it was just it definitely changed my worldview. And it was also just one of those things that while it was happening, I knew that it was I don't know if I'm ever going to come back here,
100%.
In this type of way. It's very different to go with a group of kids your age, all game, as opposed to we ran into a couple people, college kids that were maybe are out of college kids. that were like traveling alone or backpacking, and it's so different.
It's a
like,
very different
yeah.
experience.
So I think I knew when I was in there, like, this is cool. Like, this is like different.
Super
and
special.
Yeah, yeah.
And so with your studies in India, in the area of the world that is known for its Buddhist teachings, and you're going through all these amazing areas and really like steeped in this Buddhist culture of this specific area in India. There's many different religions and many different philosophies that are sprouted
It gets
from.
super complicated.
Yeah, but where you were learning specifically around Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
And in Buddhism, one of the root of this philosophy is being content, right? Being neutral, being empty almost, but not in like a feeling empty, but just being so non-attached to the outcome of whatever you're pursuing, right?
Yeah.
And so do you think this really immersive experience and also your studies beyond within yoga and within Buddhism has helped you shape what you expect in terms of being satisfied or being like happy with your job?
Yes, I do think for sure. And I think, back to your earlier question about, what do I bring in from yoga philosophy? It is that kind of sense of non-permanence, that like everything is temporary, which I didn't even realize how much that I would carry that on through the rest of my life when I was learning about that. But yeah, I mean, like, it's just like nothing is permanent, and there's so much peace in that, especially if you're in a job that you have to be in for whatever reason. And there are so many, by the way, like there are so many valid reasons to stay in a job for what benefits, financial, even if you're not gung-ho about the job. But I just find that there is so much peace, and like nothing is permanent. Like even if you get, fired and you're in this weird limbo stage, like that's not going to last forever. And I think that philosophy gives you so much can give you so much peace,
Totally.
That, and just like the whole interconnected, we are one philosophy that runs through. I think it's really easy in our society and culture that it's very ego driven, and pulling back and seeing like, how do I fit into this? Why am I here? Like, why am I doing this job here at this company? Or why am I, you're doing this podcast? Like, why are you doing this podcast? How do you fit into the greater collective? Which is not something that we really like talk about.
Ever.
And even within a company, it's still so ego-driven and so individualistic. And I think that at an executive level, it would bring what would company culture look like if it was like, I think it gets wrapped up in the word team, but what would it look like if it was like, okay, where do we all fit in with this, and how do we all work together, as opposed to like, how do we serve these, the consumer,
Or as opposed to thinking of course, there's hierarchies and there's levels to be respected, but instead of thinking there's this role and then there's this role and then you're my direct report and that, it's like, okay, we're a puzzle, and how do all the pieces fit together so that we can support each other?
Yeah, and learn from each other. To your point, just there are positions to be respected and different levels that you have to go through certain things to get there. But how do you learn from that, as opposed to viewing that as like, oh, this guy is just like annoying, he's just making me do busy work, or whatever. It's like, well, why, and if you don't like it, ask him, why am I doing this? And I think, so I don't know if that answers your question.
No, for sure. And okay, so you've talked a little bit about people being unhappy in their jobs, and there might be reasons to leave or reasons to stay. How can someone who's listening right now who might be feeling a little uninspired or maybe unappreciated, or perhaps they're feeling stuck? We've mentioned the word together outside of this podcast, the word soul sucking.
Yeah, I think that's in my like podcast like little descriptor. It's like when your job feels like it's sucking the soul out of you.
Exactly. And I think everyone at some stage in their life has had a job or a role in some capacity where they felt that. How can you recognize within yourself, whether that's a physical feeling or something happening emotionally, like how can you recognize when it's time to change your career or make a pivot, or perhaps ask to jump horizontally across to different roles? Like how can people recognize that within themselves or within their job?
Well, one, everybody can, there's ebbs and flows, and this is just with life, we go through periods where we're ebbing and when we're like in the flow, right? And if you find yourself in the ebb for too long, and I think that's where intuition comes into it, right? And that's where like I do think you have to get a little woo to really tap into that next, if you are going to pivot or if you are, feeling unfulfilled in your job, like there are bigger questions that you need to ask yourself. And I think part of it is that people either have a little bit of resistance towards that and not wanting to go deep because of fear or just inconvenience. But if you've been in that ebb for too long, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel either, it's like career depression where you're just like, if you're really depressed at work, but other parts of your life are better or okay, like then it might just be work. If you're depressed overall, you might be depressed, and there might be different issues and why. But if you're going to work every day and you're just like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. How did I get here? Why is this what I'm doing now? Like, is this the rest of my life? Like, if you're asking those questions, that might be a sign, a red flag sign that you need to start either, testing the water somewhere else or just asking other people, are you going through this too? I think also people don't talk about it. And if they do talk about it, it's just in a way of, commiserating with each other, like, oh, I hate my job, know. And
there's like not anything helpful coming out of that.
Yeah. And so that's when either you if you have a mentor, great. If you don't, you can get a coach or talking to, somebody who you admire, somebody who has kind of a similar background to you, but they have already done the pivot and talking to them like, why did you do that? How did you do that? What can I do to maybe start moving in that direction?
Yeah, I hear that a lot, actually. People on the podcast have talked about when they've taken big leaps of faith, started their own law firm, took a gap year for a year. Instead of asking people within their circle that have never done that before, which is no judgment on them, but they're like, why would I ask someone who's never done what I want to do? I'm going to ask someone who I can see as an example what their path was like for them. And like you said, sometimes it takes that third-party objective person to come in and help you. So if you are having those questions or you are feeling that career depression like you spoke about, it's really great to speak to a career coach like yourself or working perhaps with a therapist or someone to be able to have that objective view, to be able to help you put some of those priorities or those questions in line for yourself. So I think that's super important, is to have a mentor, a coach, someone that you can rely on to not just commiserate with you like sometimes our work colleagues can do.
Like sometimes you need that.
There's a place for that.
Time and place for that, for sure.
But when you're ready to level up or you're ready to make a change or you're uncertain about something, sometimes going to the same people that are in the same mess
you're
as
just
you.
in an echo chamber.
Echo chamber,
and
for sure.
That's not really going to help you move the needle. And I will also say, just as like a point, a therapist and a coach are two very different things.
Exactly.
So if you are basically a coach is future oriented. So like goal setting, accountability, figuring out, skills assessment for careers anyway, skills assessments, even like resume writing and cover letter writing and, all personality assessments within the lens of like going forward. Whereas a therapist, they're going to diagnose you if you have any kind of mental illness or mental illness, or, dive into all the past stuff. So that is a differentiation that I think is really important, because I think a lot of people are like, well, is a coach just like a therapist gallivanting around without a degree? And it's like, no, it's different.
It's so different.
Yeah, therapists aren't going to tell you what to do, whereas a coach isn't necessarily going to tell you what to do, but they're going to like very firmly push you. Or, I was on a coaching call the other day and we were going through something, and I was, there was a point where it's like, given all of this is probably not the best route for you. Do you agree or no? And you having an open conversation about that.
Totally.
So it's different.
I think that's a really important differentiator, because also in my private coaching that I've done before, there's been times where I've had to be like, this is out of my scope. Like, this is like, I am recommending so-and-so as a therapist because that's out of my scope as a coach. And I think it's really important for coaches listening as well, like knowing where your boundaries lie, knowing where your scope lies, and knowing what the outcome is that you are as a coach trying to help your client attain.
Yeah.
And I really like that idea of coaches are future focused and therapists are not necessarily only past focused, but they're not going to tell you, okay, these are the next steps that you need to do, because they're trying to help you kind of uncover some of that of the past. So that's a really good differentiator. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
So on your podcast, you interview a lot of people about career happiness. Yes. So out of all the episodes that you've done, I'm sure you've seen some common themes in what people are talking about in what makes them happy about their job or what mindset they have about their job, like what type of characteristics about certain jobs that seem to equate to higher career happiness. Can you explain a little bit of the biggest takeaways that you've seen from that?
Yeah, I actually have an episode that I recorded after my first 10 episodes, and I'm going to do another one after, I can't decide like how many, but about that, like my 3 biggest lessons that I've learned. And the one that sticks out is that it's not as linear as you think. Like careers might look very planned out on a resume, but 99% of the time they're not. So knowing that, I think is also like a peace giver, that if you're not in one of those careers that's very, step by step, like a doctor or a lawyer, and it's like you go to school and then you go to, medical school and then you do your residency, if you're in a different type of career than that, it's okay if you kind of zigzag. That's probably better than, and you're probably going to be a little bit more fulfilled and be able to, learn all of the things that will lead you, where you want to go. Also, I think following your excitement, I think that's like a huge one where people, they might think it's like a little fluffy, but all the happiest people that I've interviewed, they're like, it was just exciting. Like, it was just cool to me, like this is where, like, I'm just thinking of Alex Wolff. His episode is one of my favorites because he was in school and he was working at like a high-end restaurant. He was like, I was making great money and I really enjoyed it way more than I was enjoying school. School will always be there. I'm going to go do this for a bit. And he ended up actually traveling all around. He would be a really cool guest. Traveling all around, opening up these like luxury restaurants for Jean-Georges. He's like this huge, celebrity chef. Anyway, so I think following your excitement is another really big one. And I think intuition, is probably the other thing where it's like if you feel like something's off, it probably is. And you are probably more qualified than you think you are to recognize that feeling, and also more qualified than you think you are to go after whatever that big leap is.
Totally.
Like sometimes, and I always come back to like the Nike, the Nike logo where it's like, just do it. Sometimes it really is like, you really just have to do it and to see like what happens.
And it's like recognizing that a lot of the skills that you have in one job can be transferable just because maybe it's not, okay, I went from a coordinator to a manager to a director to a VP. All the skills that you've learned along the way can be transferred to starting your own business or jumping over to another, industry or, like there's so many ways to be able to look back at your experience and realize nothing was for waste. Like everything adds up.
Yeah.
And I think that's because people get really nervous. Like, I've spent these many years investing in my career. I've spent, specifically when I think about traveling, I hear a lot of people say, I'm going to work my ass off until I'm 45, 50, 55, and then I'll take my break then because I'm climbing that ladder right now and I don't want to take that break.
Yeah.
I'm worried what's going to happen if I took a 3-month break, if I took a year break, even though I really want to, I'm just worried what's going to happen at the other end of that. So from your perspective as somebody who's worked with a lot of different careers, you've headhunting, recruiting, being a career coach now, how do you help people through something like that if they're feeling they need a gap year or they're going to go on maternity leave and they're worried about what's going to happen to them career-wise? Like just taking a break in general because so many people are feeling so burnt out from their jobs where they're needing to take sabbaticals, they're needing to take gap years, they want to go travel with their kids. Like I mentioned, maternity leave. From a career perspective, what is that looking like now in 2023, 2024 for people to take breaks?
Yeah, I think it's becoming a lot more accepted, first of all, which is great. I think even like LinkedIn is now allowing like just a gap year, or whatever, like a work break on their little resume thing.
Timeline,
yeah. Timeline, which is amazing because like we all need it, first of all. If we don't all do it, we all need it. And there's nothing wrong with it. Like, I don't know where this mentality came from that's unacceptable, especially maternity leave. Like, oh my God, you just had a human, that needs you. It's okay if you want to extend it. They're really, don't even get me started.
Yeah, this is a whole other podcast.
That's like a whole other podcast, yeah. But in any case, but yeah, it's not normal to be on the brink of a nervous breakdown when you're at your job on a pretty consistent basis. So if you're there, which a lot of people are, burnt out or on the verge of a mental breakdown, like that is a surefire sign that you need to step out and take a break, whether it's a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, however long. And honestly, like on your resume, you can just write, gap year, sabbatical, whatever you want to write on it, and just explain it. If the employer has an issue with it, that's not an employer you want to work for, So if anything, it will give you the time and space to just like decompress and find yourself again. And a lot of the time when somebody takes an extended period off, they realize that they don't want to go back to where they were.
Right.
And that's great because you gave yourself, you probably would have been in that career for a lot longer and found this out at a way later stage. And, what you said earlier, no experience is a wasted experience. And giving yourself that time to be okay with the fact that you don't want to go back to it, that doesn't mean that you're wasting, 15 years of experience. You're just taking that, coupling it with excitement and seeing where the overlap is. And that's the sweet spot. That's where you can kind of direct your energy. And I think if you come at it from a place of excitement as opposed to a place of like fear and nerves, you'll find a lot more opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's super important because so many people are afraid of just taking even a little bit of a break. They don't want to take their leave. They don't want to, it's really a problem, especially as with remote working, as great as it is, we are seeing people get burnt out so much more because they wake up, boom, I'm on my computer, I'm working.
There's like
no commute.
Boundary at all.
There's no boundary, right? So you mentioned very briefly just then about writing in your resume. So let's say somebody took a 6-month break from work. Either they took a sabbatical, they took a break, they're taking a pivot, then they get into a new role and they're writing their resume or they're about to interview for a new job or whatever it may be. What is the best way for somebody to write that on their resume if they did say, okay, I'm going to take this 6-month break, I'm going to go travel, I'm going to give myself the space to breathe and come back to me, but holy shit, what do I do when I write my resume and I'm going for this first interview and they say, what have you been doing for the last 6 months? From your perspective as a career coach, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I would say just write that you took 6 months off.
Right?
Like it's not a big deal. Like it's not as big a deal as you think it is.
Right.
I wouldn't say like I was gallivanting around like drinking every day. You know, like I wouldn't go there. But anything that you can pull from that experience, which hopefully, if you take 6 months off, hopefully you have really amazing experiences during those 6 months that help to illuminate some, whatever personal development journey or, intellectual curiosity, something like that. Put that in your in bullet points if you want or on your resume. But yeah, I don't think that there's any need to explain your way out of it, like, oh, well, I was doing it because, somebody forced me to do it, whatever. It's, I took this off because I was feeling unfulfilled in my last job and I needed some time and I've always wanted to do this. I had the funds, whatever. It seemed like a really good time. And now that I did that, I had this great experience where I learned XYZ coupled with my, experience from before, which brought me here to you today interviewing because, all of this really lines up perfectly. And I think, all of those experiences will make me a better employee and will help me serve whatever this position is in a more holistic way.
Totally. And also like, I don't know, whenever I go on retreat with our clients or we go away for 3 weeks at a time, I come back ready to kick ass. Like I'm like, totally. I am so energized. I'm back to myself. I'm feeling, and so that could be a really big positive for employers if they are willing to look at it that way. So I think that's a really interesting take for sure. So the last thing I'd love to just touch on before we wrap up is if somebody's listening and thinking they're dissatisfied with their job, they're uninspired, all the things we talked about, they feel like their soul's getting sucked every day going to work. What are some very quick pieces of advice or questions they could ask for themselves to start finding those pings of excitement or pings of interest to kind of see where that Venn diagram of interest versus experience versus, all the things kind of merge together?
Yeah. So when you're at work and you find yourself in flow, we can talk about flow, but in a period where you're like actually enjoying what you're doing, take note of that. So basically like take note of any time in your life, whether it's at work or outside of work, where you're happy and excited to be there, and make a note, like what time of day was it? Who were you with? What were you doing? Like get specific about it and see, how much of that was at work and how much of that was somewhere else, and see if there's anywhere that they could overlap. the other thing is like I'm a big proponent of journaling and just giving yourself some time either in the morning or the evening, depending on if you're, a morning person or not, to just form stream of consciousness, like let some things out. A lot of, when you first start, it might feel weird, but the more you do it, the more you get used to just kind of letting a free flow go and things will come up. And I think, between that and tuning in on a daily basis of like where you are happy or not, and by happy I just mean content. Like you don't have to be laughing and overly joyous, but just where you're content, and if that's working on a spreadsheet for you, awesome. My husband loves spreadsheets. Like that is not my deal, but just know where you are happy and content and feeling challenged and excited to do that challenge. So those are some little things.
That's such an interesting point because the challenge part is very important.
Yeah.
You could be happy to go for a walk, but at a certain point you're going to be like, okay, where's the challenge? Because your body needs that tension point of conflict and oxytocin, cortisol, adrenaline, and dopamine. Like we need that constant kind of push-pull tension, not an overflowing tension where it becomes overwhelm or too much stress, chronic stress over time, but we need that like happy point, that happy medium of conflict and tension and happiness so that we're feeling like we're challenged and we're utilizing our skills.
Right.
Because when you feel like you're challenged and you're utilizing your skills and you're learning something new on a daily basis, your brain loves that so much and that contributes to more
dopamine.
Happiness. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just like feeling like you said, that overjoyous every day, everything is great.
Because that's also unrealistic.
Exactly.
Like no one's going to be in that state all the
Exactly.
time, And I think, we're both moms. So I think a good example of this is like, I love being with my kids, but being with them 24/7 is not
sustainable.
It's not sustainable. And like, it's going to drive me insane. But I mean, like for me personally, there's not enough of a intellectual challenge for me to be content being a stay-at-home mom. For some moms, they get super into it and they do like arts and crafts and they get their like homes. It's like amazing. That's just not where my, zone of genius is. But that's okay. You don't have to be, a preschool teacher to be a mom, right? But and that's just an example. So noticing you can really enjoy something, but if there's not enough of a pushback where you have to use creative problem solving, you're going to get bored. And boredom is where we die. And that's where we get that career depression.
100%.
Yeah.
Oh, you just like wrapped that up so well. Thank you so much. So I always end these episodes with rapid fire questions around travel. So the number one is, if you could only go back to one country or place in the world, where would it be and why?
The first one that came to mind, London. Like I think
Really?
England. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
What about it?
I don't know. When we went right before COVID, we did London, Paris, and Amsterdam. And I don't even know why we chose those. Paris, because my friend was living there at the time, and I was like, I have to see her before she leaves. London, I'm half French Canadian and half British, right? Okay. So I was like, there was kind of like, I just love British shit. I like tea. I like Downton Abbey, like anything. Like I grew up riding horses. So there's kind of this like, I don't know. I must have had past lives there because I just feel like a weird pull towards it. And I remember we got there and we were driving around London. I was like, I could live here. It would be very easy, and then it's so like easy to get to Europe.
Sometimes you just feel that. Sometimes you get somewhere and you're like, I either feel like I've been here before or I could easily live here. I feel that everywhere I go.
Yeah, really? Oh my gosh,
like
that's
almost
overwhelming.
everywhere. Yeah, I know it is. That's why I'm always like, where do I go? What do I do? So number two is, what's next on your bucket list?
On my husband's, I know it's Japan. He's been wanting to go to Japan for a long time, so I would obviously love to do that as well. So next on my bucket list, I don't know. I want to get like 1,000 certifications. I'm like I want to get my 300-hour, to tack onto my 200-hour for yoga, and that's a big one that I would love to do. And what's next? I am hoping to start doing some speaking engagements because we didn't talk about this, but I have a background in acting, and I really enjoy public speaking.
Amazing.
Which just like nobody enjoys that. But
we'll be on the lookout for you then.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So that would be fun.
Awesome. Number three is, what's the biggest life lesson that you learned while traveling?
Ooh. When in doubt, sports and a smile will go pretty far. Like, even if you don't speak the language, like if you smile, you're most likely going to get a smile back. And if you have no idea what to talk about with them, like if you're in India, just say the word cricket and people will start talking, or, in England, like football, whatever.
Yeah.
People really like talking about sport. I'm not like a big sports person, but if you're just like in one of those awkward, like,
So how about the cricket?
yeah. And it's so funny. They like light up and
Yeah.
it's like really interesting.
That's
to
awesome.
see. Yeah.
And the very last one is, what's the number one piece of advice that you would give to someone who wants to go traveling but hasn't yet done it yet?
Do it.
Yeah.
Go.
Like, done.
I think go, it's funny. My parents are late 60s, early 70s, and my dad had never gone to Europe until right before the pandemic so he was in his 60s. And my husband and I had gone around the same time, like within a couple of weeks. And the woman checking us in was like, I'm so glad you guys are doing this now. And we were like, what? And she was like, yeah, I see a lot of older people doing it. And she's like, which is great, but it's great to do it when you're younger, because you have more energy, you can do more stuff, and you have those memories for a longer period of time. And it was like 5:30 in the morning, and this woman is giving us this amazing sage advice. And we're like, cool. So I would say, if you're listening to this and you're older, definitely go do it. And if you're younger, try to do something. My husband and I try to go somewhere we haven't been for one trip, and then somewhere that we really want to go back to for a second trip.
I love that. Yeah. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Because it's always hard to choose.
We don't always do it, but we try.
It's hard to choose. There's so many places you want to go back to, but there's so many places you want to see. So if you say, okay, if we're doing 2 trips a year, we're going to go back to somewhere and continue to build that relationship with that place, and then we're going to go explore somewhere new. And there's something really powerful about going back to somewhere that you already know. Like, we're going to Thailand for 5 weeks at the beginning of this year. And everyone's like, are you nervous? What are the kids? It's a lot. And I'm like, look, there's a lot of variables with kids, especially in Thailand.
I have so many
the water,
questions for you
the
about
food,
that,
the mosquitoes. Like, there's a lot that in my
the
mind.
mosquitoes.
Yeah, because they carry diseases. Like, I get freaked out.
Yeah.
But every single place we're going, we've been to before, where I'm like, I know the exact street to get to this exact restaurant.
Yeah, there's
I know
something
this
like
place.
comforting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool. Well, thank you
Thank
so much. This was so fun.
Thanks.
I think there's going to be so much value in our listeners being able to hear. There's so many conversations being had about career pivots and reevaluation. So I'm really excited for people to listen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Transform with Travel podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode of inspiration, adventure, and exploration. If you felt inspired by this episode, please rate and review in whatever streaming app you're listening from. This allows us to spread the word even more and continue to serve up weekly doses of adventure. As always, we'd love if you could share the episode with someone in your life who you think will benefit from this conversation. Thanks so much for listening. This is your reminder to get out there and keep on exploring.